Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. In each episode, members of ATA's Professional Development Committee will interview translation and interpreting specialists. They'll ask about what the work entails, what skills are needed, the pros and cons, and so much more. The goal is to showcase the variety of career paths in translation and interpreting and help working professionals and students understand what's out there, how they can get started, and what they need to succeed. Specialization is arguably the best way to strengthen your translation and interpreting business and stand out from the crowd. We're hoping to bring you one episode a month, and we hope you'll join us on this informative journey. This podcast is brought to you by the American Translators Association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information at the end of the show. All right, now over to the PD Committee and this edition of Inside Specialization.
Hello, my name is Daniel Sebesta, and for this episode of our Inside Specialization podcast, I am interviewing Paula Arturo today. Paula Arturo is a lawyer-linguist and lecturer, and after working as a translator for over 20 years and as an in-house linguistic consultant at Marvel O'Farrell and Myrell, she has now moved on to academia as lectural and postdoctoral research fellow at Georgetown University's Law School's Center for Legal English. Her bragging rights include translating the works of Nobel Prize laureates and shadow reports for the United Nations Universal Periodic Review of several Latin American states, where she helped nonprofit and grassroots organizations have a voice before the Human Rights Council. Wow, that's one impressive lawyer-linguist profile, Paula, and you're such a great source of inspiration to anyone aspiring to work in legal translation or being a lawyer-linguist. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Daniel. That's really kind of you.
So to start, would you tell us more about your background and about how you first got into legal translation?
Sure. So I always, every time I'm asked this question, it's kind of a difficult question to answer because people think that I was very deliberate in starting out as a translator and ending up where I did, but I wasn't. I actually am one of those people who kind of landed in translation by accident. I started out working a very long time ago at a multinational company, and at a boss there who would just ask me to translate stuff all the time for him, and just because I was bilingual. And then I found out that that was actually a profession and that, you had to sort of know what you were doing and learn how to do it right and all that other stuff. And so I started working as a translator by accident, kind of thanks to this boss. And I got really into it and learned as much as I could about it. But I got into legal translation just because from all the translation work that I was getting when I started freelancing, legal was what I liked the most. And I ended up being a lawyer linguist because I went to law school to be a better legal translator, which is another thing that sometimes people have a misconception about. They think that every single lawyer linguist is a lawyer who turned translator. But in my case, it was the other way around. I was a translator first and just wanted to be really good at what I was doing. So that's basically how I got into legal translation, just out of interest, I guess, just wanting to learn more and more about it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I do agree that from my experience also, it's the other way around. Somebody is a lawyer already, and then they realized they could work with international clients and other languages too. So in your opinion, do you think legal translators need to have the kind of legal background that you have to really be successful as legal translators? Or is legal translation something you can learn with some effort, of course, and become good at, even if you don't necessarily have a legal degree?
So I think that's a really great question because it does come up a lot. And I know that some of my colleagues who are lawyers feel that without a law degree, you can never be a great legal translator. But I disagree. I think that it's not, a degree doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be the best at anything. It just says you went to a certain school and for a certain amount of time and took a bunch of tests. It doesn't mean you're good. It doesn't mean you loved it. It doesn't mean you're passionate about it. It doesn't even mean that you know everything that you need to know to be good at the work that you're ultimately going to do. So it says something about your academic background and maybe your academic commitment, but it doesn't say anything about the quality of the work that you can deliver. So if you're a person who loves the law and you're very passionate about the law and you can read through all those really, really clunky, heavy books that law students carry around and understand what you're reading, and you can hold a very intelligent conversation with a lawyer about a legal topic, and you can follow that conversation and really understand in depth what you're talking about, then you're going to be a good legal translator, even if you didn't go to law school. And there are many people who have that talent, right? I can think of some of the best legal translators that I know are not necessarily people who are lawyers. So being a lawyer helps. It makes the law part a lot easier, especially especially if you have received education, formal training in both civil law and common law jurisdictions, and you happen to work with languages that are civil law and common law languages, it'll make your job a lot easier. But really what guarantees that you're going to be a great legal translator is how much you're willing to learn. And you're always going to be learning things when you're a legal translator, even if you went to law school, even if you've been doing it forever, because it's so vast and it just covers, so much. There's so much to learn that it never ends. So to me, what makes you a great legal translator is to be humble enough to admit that you're never going to know everything, and research is always going to be a large part of what you do.
Right. On the notion of learning, how do lawyer linguists effectively keep up to date with the law and the legal language in, the source language country and the target language country?
I think different lawyers go about it in different ways. Personally, what I do is I take every course out there that's offered in the other legal system, right? So I was trained in a civil law country. I went to law school in Argentina. And so, of course, I stay connected with Argentine law. We have a gazette that's published daily, and so you check it out and you look at what's going on. But when it comes to common law jurisdictions, I will take every course that I can from law schools, American law schools, because most of when I was translating, most of the work I was receiving was from American firms. So I would take every course I could on US law for civil trained attorneys. And those were always really great courses because they're directed at people who already have a legal background. And you really get to go in depth into all these different topics, and you can not just keep updated with the law, but you also get a really good feel for how professionals talk about the law, right? Which is really what we need to stay updated with. It's the language, which is always evolving and always changing. So it kind of has, two advantages to it. It's what's going on in the legal world, but you also get that feel for how the language is evolving in parallel to that.
Right. So could you tell us, when you were still translating, what were some of the typical translation assignments that you would work on in this subject area, and who were you contracted by? Who were your typical clients?
So I went through different stages. Before law school, I worked with many agencies. So I got a lot of agency work in the legal world, and that was, a lot of contracts and just very typical legal stuff, certificates and the kind of things that agencies usually give out. But then when I started law school, many of my professors found out that I was also a translator. And so I started getting work that I personally was a little bit more interested in, which was academic work. From professors and people that I was meeting, and my network started growing. And then through those different academic contacts, I started getting work in the human rights world, which was really what I loved doing the most. And that's how I ended up doing all this UN stuff and the Nobel Prize publications and the International Bar Association. Those were all contacts and translations mostly that I got through my academic contacts. So it ended up, just that period of my career ended up being a lot about human rights reports, shadow reports for the United Nations, and different documents that would end up in the hands of governments or decision makers in certain key places. So those were very interesting reports that I was translating at that time. And then after that, when I went to the firm, then there most of the work was everything that goes through the hands of firms, but mostly memos, right? So we were doing a lot, I was translating a lot of memos and a lot of contracts. So we had a lot of transactional documents, and memorandums of law are different because basically it's an expert advising a client on something. So the tone is quite different from the tone that we're used to seeing in other legal documents. So it changes a lot depending on where you're working, right? If you're working, for the type of organization that you work with, or the type of contacts that you make in your network, are really what's going to determine the type of content you get to translate.
Right. And your interests too. You said you were so deeply interested in human rights. What are some of the most common or perhaps most lucrative subspecializations within legal translation? Is it human rights, or is it criminal law, or is it business law, company law? And would you recommend subspecializing in an area like that to somebody who's just starting to explore legal translation as their professional area?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm very much pro specialization and pro subspecialization. When I was at the firm, I found out, and I didn't know this honestly before I even started working in a big firm like the one that I was at. The place where we struggled most to find good translators in was in compliance law. It was hard to find people who were very, very good at at maritime law, just what people would normally view as the more boring areas of law. So we had really great specialists who, were people who were amazing at contracts, but we couldn't always send them the contracts because they involved, maritime vocabulary or aerospace. Aerospace was also another area that was really, really hard to find translators in. And it wasn't a matter, because sometimes when you say it's hard to find good translators, people say it might be a matter of rates. I'm not talking about a firm that paid low rates, right? So we're assuming, a firm that pays well and that really puts a lot of emphasis in finding good translators. It was just very hard to find people who were that specialized. So yeah, what I would recommend to someone who's looking for a subspecialization is think of your potential client first. If you want to work for a big tier 1 law firm like the one that I was working at, what I would recommend that you do is you check out who the partners are at that firm and check out what areas of law those partners work in. Because that's really what's going to give you a feel for international firms, for where that international firm is putting its money and where its money is coming from. It's the partners are the ones that bring the money into the firm, so you follow the money. And that is what will give you a good feel of, well, if I'm marketing to these types of firms, looking at where their money is coming from will give you a good feel for what you need to specialize in, or what you need to, where you need to add value compared to your own competitors as a language service provider. And that was one thing that was never, that I didn't see so much from translators, right? They would send us their resume. I was in the language department, and it was either, a lot of generalists, or they were just saying like, well, we're not going to use machine translation. That's fine. That's, but that's not really what our partners cared about. What our partners cared about was, well, do they understand the subject matter, right? If I have to explain something really complicated in a memo to a client and there's a lot of money involved, will the translator understand it well enough for my client to ultimately be able to understand this document well enough and make an informed decision, right? And that's really what they care about. Yeah,
great advice. Follow the money, learn more about your potential client. Thank you for that. So apart from subject matter expertise, knowing the law, legal terminology, then possibly knowing maritime technology, aerospace technology, what other skills do specialized legal translators need?
I would say people skills. And I know there's always a big debate in the translation world. It seems like you have people that pay a lot of attention just to people skills and not enough to hard skills, and others that seem to take the exact opposite position. But I think you need to be in the middle, right? You need to have the hard skills. They're essential. You won't get anywhere without the hard skills, even if you're the best marketer in the world. Once you get through the door, if you're not really good at what you do, then you're going to lose the client, and you don't want to do that. But you also have to be really good at dealing with people, because the legal world is a complicated world. It's a very demanding world. Lawyers are always in a hurry, and it's not, translation is not the number one thing on the mind of lawyers when they're doing their job. Translation is kind of an afterthought. It's, first they want to get their work done. They want to get the work done in time. Clients are always in a hurry too. And so by the time we get to the translator, we need a translator who is excellent, but is also easy to deal with. Someone whose processes are in place so that all we have to do is just reach out to that person and just quickly know if they'll be able to do the job or not. And, if they say they're going to do the job, are they going to be able to meet the deadline? And if the deadline that we're asking for is ridiculous, then can they tell us? Is it someone who will be honest, who will be professional enough to know when to say no, but also do it in a way that makes it easy to work with this person, right? So sometimes our attitude and the way that we talk to our clients is just as important as how good we are at what we do. And in law, we do see that a lot.
Absolutely. People skills, soft skills, as important as ever, or perhaps even more in the legal world. Tell me, is there anything you ever disliked about being a legal translator within the span of your long experience?
I can't say there was anything I disliked. What I can say is, I guess I've changed my my roles throughout the many years that I've been in this profession, including now. I've had to change it every few years, just because I'm the kind of person who needs to be challenged a lot. And one thing that can happen, I think, in legal translation is it's easy to get very comfortable. And so like if I had, just if I could talk to my younger self, I would just say, you're going to love this, but every now and then you're going to get a little too comfortable, and that can be dangerous, right? So I think that it just has that one danger of you can get too comfortable with a big client, you can get too comfortable with one particular subject matter, and you can sometimes forget to push yourself. So if you're the kind of person who needs to be challenged, you'll get bored, right? If you're not pushing yourself to be better and to find ways to continue to make the profession interesting. But I can't say that there's anything that I dislike about it. I mean, if you're a person who really is passionate about the law and you like to read, because that's also very, very important, as if you don't like to read, this is not for you. But if you like to read and you like to think about these big problems that societies go through and how different societies have tried to solve those problems, then the law is always interesting.
That's great to hear. In many areas, translators are facing a bit of a disruption by technology, machine translation, more specifically. Do you think that is something that is a threat to the legal translation profession? Do you see it as a threat, or do you see it as an opportunity for legal translators, or do you think it's indifferent in the area?
I think it's only a threat if you translate like a machine. Machine translation has changed a lot over the past few years. And it has gotten better. It's still being quite oversold, right? I mean, when you talk to people who are very passionate about machine translation, they kind of sell it like what you're getting from machine translation is the same quality that you would get from a human translator. And sometimes it is, but that's not a good thing, right? It's the quality that you would get from a human translator who's not that good. Right. So, or who still has a long way to go. Right. It's maybe something you would get from a newbie, someone who doesn't always catch all the nuances in legal terminology. So translators can add a lot of value to machine translation in the part that is still a very human exercise, which is just being able to catch all those different nuances, all the different connotations that the terminology can have, and catch that in time to not translate very literally and to end up with an end product that really sounds like it was written by a human being, which is what we want to read. So I think that that a lot of times people feel that translation work is threatened by machine translation, but then when you talk to those people about how they translate, you think, well, we could be doing better as humans to really add value to the human element in that translation. But I don't necessarily see it as a threat for people who are highly specialized and for people who can tackle very complex texts and do it very well. I don't think those are threatened by machine translation at all. But it is true that a large part of what humans used to do is going to machines. I mean, the firm where I was working, we used to hire translators for everything. And now when one of our partners just wanted the gist of what something said, they would go straight to machine translation. It would not go to human. And this is like, just partners would know this. They wouldn't even ask the language department, what do you think? They would just, stick it in some kind of machine translation and see if they could get the gist of it. But when there's a lot of money at stake, we would always default to human translators and to the really, really good human translators, to the ones who could read between the lines, sometimes even find mistakes in the source text and flag them for us. Those were always very appreciated. And the ones who can read those impossibly subordinated sentences that lawyers love to write. So yeah.
Okay,
I guess
that's
I was thinking, I guess in short, I'm just saying it's only a threat if you're not that good
right,
at
right.
translating.
As is the case in other fields of translation too. Uh, just a final question, perhaps. What are your go-to resources for legal terminology, for style, for I guess the knowledge of the law of another country? If you had to pick one for your languages, what would it be?
Oh, wow, that's good. So if I want to really know how a term is used for a civil law jurisdiction, I will always default to, well, after checking, dictionaries or whatnot. I'm not very big on bilingual dictionaries. I prefer to compare and contrast monolingual dictionaries to each other. I'm also very big on looking at the codes when I'm working with a civil law jurisdiction, just going straight to, well, what does the code say? How has this been defined in whatever, if it's procedural code or if it's a civil term or whatever, just go to the code, look at how that, and I commented codes, of course, that have been commented by scholars who will go in depth about that term and how it's been understood. I also always recommend reading law books, the same law books that law students read. So if you can just go through the syllabus, a lot of law professors in different areas will publish their syllabuses online, and you can look at what they're teaching and what reading resources they're recommending for your students. So I always recommend going to those. And when you're working with common law jurisdictions, I recommend always being very careful about what state something is coming from, or what common law jurisdiction it is, right? A legal term may not be understood the same way in California as it would be in a different state in the US, or a different common law country, even if it's also an English-speaking common law country. So I would go to the sources that lawyers use in those countries as well. So you go to their case law, you go to whatever it is that lawyers, depending on the area of specialization, whatever it is that lawyers are reading in that area, go there, because that's going to give you a feel for how they understand that term. But what you do have to be careful with is to make sure that whatever resources you're using are specific to the particular jurisdictions that you're working with. So don't just assume that because it's in English, or if you're working with Spanish, because it's in Spanish, just really pay attention to, are the sources that I'm looking at Spanish for Spain, Spanish for Peru, US English, or, what state is this coming from, and so on. So I think that's what we need to be really careful with when working with terminology.
Yes, very true. And the locale really matters in legal translation for languages such as English or Spanish. Paula, thank you so much. I know you would have so much more to say about the law and language, but we'll have to leave it here for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and expertise with our ATA audience.
And thank you, Daniel. This was also wonderful. I appreciate that you asked me to do this podcast, and I always love talking to my colleagues at the ATA, so thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Inside Specialization, our series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. Big thanks to everyone involved in the production of this episode. ATA's PD committee developed and coordinated the interview. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platts. Mary David and Rashawn Paccarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. Now, if you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's somebody out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about us. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. I can honestly say that ATA launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make a difference. And ATA isn't just for translators or interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can become members. We have teachers, professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. Go to ATA's website, atanet.org, for details. Or check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.